In this video, you're going to learn how to write a function that returns a value. So you've already seen how to write a function that draws something, but sometimes instead of drawing, we want to return a value. So maybe calculate a value, and then we're going to use it somewhere else in our code. So in this example, you can see that we have our setup function, and then a function called average. And this function has two parameters, num1 and num2, and it calculates the average of those. So it adds them up and then divides by 2. And you can see that we're using parentheses here, just like you do in math, to make sure that we add before we divide by 2. Now the new thing here is we've got this return. Return is a key word in P5js, and whenever you see return, that does two things. One is it sends the value that comes after it, so this number that we're calculating gets sent back to where you're calling the function. So right here we call our average function. This value gets sent back here and plugged in for this function call. So when we say let avg equals, and then we call average, the value that's returned by average is assigned into our avg variable. So that's what the return does. It sends a value back to where the function was called. It also makes this function end. So if I were to type code after this down here, it would never run because return says this is the end of the function. Once this line runs, nothing else in this function is going to run. All right, so when we run this, to open up our console, and you can see it prints 300, which is the average of 200 and 400. So that's how we do a function that returns a value. Now the value that we return doesn't have to be a number. It could be true or false. It could be text. So we're going to see another example now where we return true or false. So in this example, we have our setup function, our draw function, and a function called pointInRect. So what this function is going to do is it's going to tell us true or false is a point inside of a rectangle. So we've got parameters here to define our rectangle. So Rx and Ry are going to be the top left corner of our rectangle. So R standing for the rectangle's x coordinate, the rectangle's y coordinate. W and H are the width and height of the rectangle. And then PY and PX. Oh, I should switch those. Makes a little more sense to put x first and y second. So we'll do PX and PY, and that is the coordinates for the point. And we want to check if that point is inside the rectangle. So we're going to add code for that in the body of the function, and it's going to return true if px, py is inside the rectangle, and it's going to return false if it's not inside the rectangle. So now you can see that I've added code to check if px, py is inside the rectangle. So we'll come back to this if statement, but you can assume if this is true, then our point is inside of the rectangle, so we're returning true. So again, this return keyword saying when we get to this line in the function and send true back to where we called this from. Otherwise, it's going to run the else, and here it's going to return false. So the way this if statement works is we first check to make sure that our point's x coordinate is bigger than the x coordinate for the left-hand side of our rectangle. So we know that if our point is inside the rectangle, it has to be to the right of the left-hand side. Then we want to check to make sure that the point's x coordinate is to the left of the right-hand side. So the right-hand side coordinate is determined by the left-hand x coordinate plus the width of the rectangle. So we have to make sure our point's x coordinate is less than that. And then we do a similar comparison for the point's y coordinate. So we have to make sure that it's larger than the top, so it needs to be below the top of our box or our rectangle. And then the point's y-coordinate needs to be above the bottom. So if all of those four things are true, our point is in our rectangle and we return true. So I'm now going to add a function call to setup. So I'm making a variable called inBox. I'm going to call my pointInRect function. And then I have to put in the parameters. So I actually already have two rectangles drawn, and I want to know if there's a point inside of this rectangle. So I'm going to plug in the 200, 200 for the top left, the width and the height. And then the last two parameters for this are the point that I want to check. So I'm going to start by checking is the point 1, 1 inside of this rectangle. Now we know that this rectangle doesn't include the point 1, 1, so this inBox had better get set to false if our code is working. So I'm going to print that out so we can see if it works. So when I run this, hopefully this will print false to show that the point 1, 1 is not in this rectangle. All right, so we can see our rectangle here, and it does print false right here. So that's good. So now we want to try a point that is in the rectangle and make sure it prints true. So I'm going to change this 1, 1 to be 400, 250. And that is the middle of the screen, which is in the rectangle. So this should print true. And that works there. All right, so now that we have it printing, we're going to do something a little bit more interesting. And we're going to use the mouse's position and check if the mouse is in this box. And if it is, we're going to change the color of the fill on our circle. So to do that, I'm going to come down into the draw function, and before we draw the ellipse, we're going to check if our mouse is in the box. So I'm going to set up an if-else statement. All right, so you can see I've filled in the if-else. So if the mouse is in the rectangle, then we're going to set the fill to red. Otherwise, we're going to leave it as white. And here, we're not even making a variable like we did up here. We're just using the value directly. So we know that inside the parentheses for our if statement, we need a true-false expression. So since pointInRect returns either true or false, this fits in perfectly there. For the parameters for pointInRect, I'm again putting in the location and the dimensions of that large rectangle. And then I'm putting the mouse X, mouse Y as the point that we want to check. So now when we run it, it's going to be constantly checking, is the mouse in the rectangle? And if it is, it'll set the fill to red. All right, so here we go, drawing with the white. As soon as we move into the rectangle, you can see that at the bottom, it's now printing true. Move out, it's white again. Now, the bottom, it actually is staying as true because that's coming from here, which is only run once because it's in setup. So that's actually checking the point 400, 250. So now that we have our pointInRect function, we can come up with some kind of fun applications for it. So I'm going to switch over to the last example. And in this one, we have an ice cream cone that follows the mouse. And we use the pointInRect function to determine when our ice cream cone is in either the white or the dark brown rectangle. And then we change the color of the cone. So it's like we're dipping the cone into white chocolate, or we can come over here and dip the cone into dark chocolate. So we're just checking again, is the mouse inside of the rectangle? This time, when it is, we change the color of the cone. So you can see that we have a global variable for the color of the cone. And in the draw function, we check, is the point in the rectangle? So is our mouse, that's the point we're checking, in the rectangle for the dark chocolate? And if it is, we're setting cone color to the chocolate color, which is this color right here. And then again, if the mouse is in the rectangle for the white chocolate, we set the cone color to the white chocolate. And then we've got our function called ice cream cone. This does not return a value, it just draws the ice cream cone. And it has parameters for the location and the color of the cone. So we've got two custom functions here. One does not return anything, that's our ice cream cone, and then point and rect does return a value.